Okay, so we'll moving to the next session. Okay, so now I'd like to invite the three eminent faculties, Dr. Pankaj Shah from Ahmedabad, to chair the session. With them, giving the company Dr. Arnab Gupta from Kolkata and Dr. Anil Dikrus from Mumbai. Over to you, chairpersons.
Good morning from my side. I'm Dr. Arnab Gupta. I happen to be the president of IAS. So I'd request Dr. Pankaj Shah maybe to introduce the first speaker, and then I could do the third after Dr. Anil Dikrus maybe.
Thank you, organizer. Our first speaker is Dr. Mudhisar Ahmed from Noida. And the head and neck cancer is probably most important cancer for all the oncologists, difficult to treat and very costly affair. And many times it is state of the art to manage advanced head and neck cancer. The first, over to our first speaker. Hello.
Good morning, sir. Thanks a lot for inviting me for this session. So I'm Dr. Mudassir Ahmed. I'm from Fortis Hospital, Noida. So I'll be talking about the evolving evidences in the first line therapy of the recurrent metastatic squamous cell cancer of the head and neck. Okay, so we know that in the recurrent settings, there is a role of re-irradiation or salvage surgery or metastasiectomy. But for the purposes of this discussion, we'll be talking about the systemic therapies only. We know that head and neck squamous cell cancer is the seventh most common cancer worldwide, but in India, it is probably the third most common cancer among both sexes, and it is with a male predominance and with smokeless tobacco and betel nut as the most predominant causative factors. Gene expression patterns have been presented lately, but they have not been able to help us in identifying the first-line treatment so far. The prognostic factors for first-line chemotherapy are the size, location, the extracapsular extension with chemokine receptor presentation, and the HPV. We know that more than 50 to 60 or 70% of the locally advanced head and neck cancers will ultimately recur. And these are our modalities. From the systemic therapy point of view, we have chemotherapy, we have molecular and targeted therapies, and we have immuno-oncology drugs. At different times in the treatment of the patient, overall response rate becomes important. Sometimes PFS is important, sometimes symptom relief is important, and most of all, overall survival is important. These are the objective response rates of the single agent chemotherapeutic agents, which we can see that cisplatinum or the platinum compounds have probably the highest single agent objective response rates, which ranges from 10 to 40%, and all other chemotherapeutic drugs have single digit or early two-digit response rates. The randomized controlled trials comparing the chemotherapy with best supportive care were presented as early as in 80s, and they showed that cisplatinum improved the survival compared with the best supportive care, and the cisplatinum monotherapy was at least as effective as the platinum-based combinations. Regarding the monotherapy versus polychemotherapy, we know that the combination chemotherapy has increased the overall response rate, but the median overall survival has not increased by using the polychemotherapy. Taxanes have later on came into the armamentarium of drugs, and which has shown that the oral response rate remains the same as with respect to the cisplatin and 5-FU, and the median overall survival also remains similar to the earlier combination. So from the chemotherapy, we have the median overall survival ranging from 6 to 8 months, and no evidence that the chemotherapy prolongs survival, and polychemotherapy is more toxic but has higher response rate. The drugs which are available with us for the treatment are the targeted therapies. Anti-EGFR antibody, the cetuximab, it was presented in the EXTREME trial in 2008. It was a phase 3 randomized trial which compared the cetuximab plus chemotherapy followed by cetuximab maintenance versus the chemotherapy 6 cycles alone. And the primary endpoint of this trial was overall survival, which it clearly showed that the overall survival was 10.1 months versus 7.4 months in the chemotherapy alone arm. And the overall response rate also increased to 36% versus 20% in the other arm. So this is the Kaplan-Meier curve showing the same benefit. Then came the TP Extreme trial, which actually changed the chemotherapy backbone from the cisplatin 5-FU to platinum taxane combination. And this again was a phase 3 randomized trial of more than 500 patients. And the only other difference other than the chemotherapy backbone was that the cetuximab maintenance was given as weekly in the extreme trial arm, and the TP Extreme regimen was every 2 weeks. This is the overall survival, which was not significantly different. So the median overall survival was higher than expected. It was 14.5 months in the TP Extreme arm and 13.4 months in the extreme arm. So this was a success. The more important observation from this trial was that the adverse effects, the grade 4 adverse events, were very less, only 30% in the TP Extreme arm, which were about 44% in the extreme arm of the trial. Cetuximab-based chemotherapy have consistently shown good response rates ranging from 36 up to 40 or 52%, and some trials even showing up to 77%. And the overall median overall survival has ranged from 10 months to 14.7 months. Then comes the new kid on the block for head and neck cancers in the first line, which is the immunotherapy. We know that head and neck cancers have significant number of non-synonymous mutations that makes them sensitive for the immunotherapy drugs. And multiple antibodies are available for the 2 checkpoints which we usually target. Immune checkpoint inhibitors have been tried for the second line after the failure of the platinum, as well as in the first line. This is the most important study which we'll be discussing today, which is the pembrolizumab chemotherapy arm. Pembrolizumab chemotherapy, which was a phase 3 trial this was a first line treatment comparing the pembrolizumab alone versus 2 other arms. So there was a comparison of pembrolizumab with pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy, and comparison of pembrolizumab chemotherapy with cetuximab plus chemotherapy, the extreme regimen. The patients were stratified according to the PD-L1 status with combined positive score and P16 status, as well as the ECOG performance status. The 2 arms with pembrolizumab and cetuximab were followed by the maintenance. As I told you that there was no direct comparison in this trial between the pembrolizumab and the pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy. This is the CPS score and how we calculate it. Regarding the first subgroup, which is the patients with CPS score more than 20, and the comparison being the pembrolizumab monotherapy versus the cetuximab plus chemotherapy, and it clearly showed that the median overall survival in these patients was 14.9 months versus 10.8 months. And in the other group, which was having CPS score more than 1%, was having a median overall survival of 12.3 months versus 10.4 months. The one important limitation of the pembrolizumab monotherapy was the early, within first 5 to 6, 7 months, there was more of progressive disease seen in the pembrolizumab monotherapy, which becomes important in some of the situations. The other comparison from the trial, which was the pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy, which improves survival compared with the total population, and it showed that the median overall survival was 13 months versus 10.7 months, which was significant statistically. And the subgroup analysis in the CPS score more than 20 and CPS score more than 10 both showed a median overall survival difference of 14.7 months versus 11 months and 13.6 months versus 10.6 months. There are some limitations of this study. Is that one of the limitation is the CPS score between 1 and 20% was not presented as a separate subgroup. And it can well be that the overall survival benefit, which is seen in the subgroup of more than CPS score more than 1%, may be actually driven by those patients who have a CPS score of more than 20%, which actually constitutes about 40 to 45% of the patients. And if we take it individually, the CPS score between 1 and 20, the overall survival difference was not much. Actually, it was probably inferior. Another important thing from the study was, if we compare it with the extreme regimen, was that the overall response rates of the pembrolizumab monotherapy were very abysmal. It was only 14% as compared to 41% in the extreme trial, extreme regimen. And if we compare the pembrolizumab chemotherapy with the extreme trial, the response rate was still less. Another difference from the keynote for 048 trial with respect to our Indian population is that in India, we know that more than 2/3 of the patients are actually oral cavity cancers. In the keynote study, only 27% actually had oral cavity cancers. So by raising these questions, I'm trying to see whether this data can be applied to our population as such. Cetuximab plus chemotherapy has had a consistent overall response rate in the range of 36 up to 77% from our Indian study, which was presented in a few years earlier. And the overall survival has also been in the same range of 11 to 14 months. This is the point which I noted earlier, that the progressive disease was more seen in the pembrolizumab monotherapy compared with the extreme trial. And it was the progressive disease was still present. The progressive disease was significantly more also in the pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy arm when it was compared with the extreme arm of the trial. If we do some cross-trial comparison between this keynote 048 with the TP Extreme trial, the TP Extreme trial had a progressive disease only of 8%, while in the pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy, it is close to 15%. A word about fit elderly patients. This is one trial which is called as the ELAN-FIT trial. It used the adapted extreme regimen. It adapted the extreme regimen with some modification followed by the cetuximab maintenance. And it showed that the overall response was 40% with a median PFS of 7.2 months and OS of 14.7 months. No discussion in head and neck cancer can be complete without the mention of metronomic therapy, and there's a vast research going on for that. And this is one good research from Dr. Vijay Patil et al., and which showed that metronomic chemotherapy with celecoxib and methotrexate, when it was compared with the cisplatin single agent given intravenously, it showed better oral survival with the metronomic therapy. Recently, there has been another trial published from the same author in Lancet, in Lancet, and it has again shown that the oral metronomic therapy, though it was a non-inferiority trial, it has shown that the oral metronomic therapy was better than the intravenous chemotherapy, and it was well tolerated. The quality of life was good. It is economically, important because the monthly cost of metronomic therapy may be about $15 as compared to about $13,000 in the cetuximab-based chemotherapy, and pembrolizumab with some $20,000 monthly cost. So what should be the ideal first-line therapy? Should it be TP Extreme regimen, or should it be pembrolizumab alone, or pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy, or metronomic therapy, or should we sequence them? Should we go do cetuximab plus chemotherapy first and then the immunotherapy, or immunotherapy first and then cetuximab? So is there any data on to that? This is one important data, which was actually, the second line, the observations from the second line, from the drugs which the patients received in the second line from the trial TP Extreme versus versus Extreme trial. And it showed that the overall survival was close to 22 months in those patients who received immuno-oncology drugs in the second line after they had received cetuximab-based chemotherapy in the first line. And at about 3 years, still some 27.5% patients were alive. Okay, so this is the same. This is showing the same. This is some data from India, which is from Kolkata, which is showing that that if we use the cetuximab-based chemotherapy in the first line and achieve some PFS of about 7 months, and then go on to use nivolumab in the second line, this again showed that the median overall survival could reach up to 20.4 months with this sequence. This is another data from Japan, and it also showed overall survival close to 20 months. But NCCN has quickly made the change in the first line recommendation, which is now mainly pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy or pembrolizumab alone single agent, and the cetuximab now comes into the cetuximab and cetuximab based chemotherapy now come into the other recommendations. So should there be a sequence with a cetuximab in the first line and followed by the nivolumab in the second line, or some other immunotherapy in the second line, and then the investigational agents? I think that question is out for debate. For the decision making, I think we should be taking into account that chemotherapy still remains the backbone. Platinum sensitive, we should be dividing patients based on their platinum sensitivity and the CPS score, fitness, disease burden, and the tempo of the disease. This is one wonderful algorithm for the treatment selection on the first line, which was presented recently, and it can be seen that it has taken into account the biological age, frailty, tumor burden, disease pace, and the PD-L1 expression, with the results, with a separate set of patients rules for the patients with platinum resistant disease, that is progression within 6 months from the last platinum therapy, or versus the platinum sensitive disease. I think this probably the answer to our question will somehow come from the observations from all these trials. I think that concludes my talk. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank
Thanks.
you very much.
Gupta. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. It was a very nice review and summary of the present status of how to manage recurrent and metastatic head and neck cancer. Now I request Arnab to invite our second speaker. Dr. Gupta, please.
Okay, I thought Dr. Anil Ducruz is going to do the honors. But
Okay.
It's okay. Yeah, Dr. Anil
Go
Ducruz.
ahead.
No, Dr. Anil Ducruz, if you could please do the honors.
Arnab, because I'll be here till the panel. I've got Easter celebrations after that, so I'll have to run off here running.
Please. So please.
It was Mudassir, I enjoyed your presentation. I don't know if they're going to allow us questions and answers because there's so many unanswered questions, but I can see Mehboob all set to get off the blocks. So without much ado, I'm going to introduce Mehboob Basade, someone I've known for years. He practices in the same city as me. Mehboob is a doctor who's distinguished himself in medical oncology, has a whole lot of patients, has done a lot of work. But more correctly, now that I'm in practice, all patients speak very, very highly of him. So over to Mehboob, who's speak on immune checkpoint inhibitors in head and neck squamous cell cancers, the changing therapeutic landscape.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me over here and giving me the opportunity to talk on immune checkpoint inhibitors. My slides practically have been all covered in the earlier talk. So it would be like a repetition at what is going to happen. So I would like to finish before so that we can have some discussion in between before the next one. So these are the points which I will like to cover. What is the evolution of the treatment in metastatic breast cancer and how the immunotherapy has come into the head and neck cancers. So this study has been already covered that if the patient has got a recurrent metastatic or inoperable head and neck cancer, then the chemotherapy plus cetuximab is the standard of care with a median OS of 10.1 months compared to the chemotherapy alone only 7.1 months. So we reach a plateau with this. So how to improve upon this? So people tried to explore and look into the biology of the disease, and what they found that there were positive outcomes if you have an tumor infiltration by CD4 and CD8 cells, as well as if there are infiltrating Langerhans cells. And if they found that T regulatory cells or Treg tumor infiltration is higher or macrophage infiltration is higher, then there are higher chances of metastasis and there is a poor prognosis in such patients. We know that the head and neck cancer is also an immunosuppressive tumor, and there are a lot of immune modulatory reactions happening at the multiple levels in head and neck cancer based on the CD4 and CD8 reactions. This is the diagram showing that if there is an activated T cell immune response, there is increased cytotoxicity and there is killing of the cells. But these T cells become exhausted because of chronic infection like HPV infection into the mouth, or there is a persistent antigen stimulation happening that gives rise to the T cell exhaustion. And because of that, the immune modulation fails and the tumor progression. And if you block this T cell exhaustion by having an anti-PD-L1 or PD-1 antibodies, and the cytotoxicity improves and proliferation gets also decreased. There is another mechanism, immune exclusion, which is also an important in head and neck cancer. I'm not going to go into the much detail into that, but what I would say that which are the patients who will respond to immunotherapy? Can we predict them? So there are biomarkers, and these are various biomarkers which have been listed, and most commonly used is what we call as PD-L1 expression. And this PD-L1 expression is presented either less than 1% and 2% in both tumor cells as well as in the tumor infiltrating lymphocytes or the immune cells. And if the tumor cells are more than 1%, they have a good response as compared to the less than 1%. Immune checkpoint inhibitors have an established role now in variety of malignancies, including lung cancer, into the bladder cancer, renal cell carcinomas, and in head and neck, it is also starting to come up in a big way. So I'm going to talk, there are various targets, the antibodies which are available for the treatment, but we will just cover with the nivolumab and pembrolizumab. Both are these two, the PD-L1 inhibitors. The first drug which came in was the nivolumab, and this is a phase 3 CheckMate 141 trial where patients were heavily pretreated with earlier chemotherapies, and the patients were given nivolumab at 3 milligram per kg every 2 weekly versus the choice of the treatment by the investigators. And what they found, the overall survival was statistically significant by 2 months, by 7.7 months versus 5.1 months. But what they found that even at the end of the 18 months, 21% of the patients were alive in the nivolumab arm compared to 8% in the other chemotherapy arm. So this was the basis on which the things again compounded. And what they found that even the presence of an HPV positive or negative immunotherapy has a role to play in. So initial trial, phase 2 trial came in Keynote 040, where similar setting, instead of nivolumab, the pembrolizumab was used, and they also found a similar progression-free survival and median overall survival of 8.4 months versus 6.9 months compared to the treatment, what was the standard of care, that is the other form of the chemotherapy. So these two trials also confirmed that the PD-L1 expression is correlated with the survival benefit. And here in this one, they looked at the CPS score and the TPS score. And as the TPS score or CPS score increases, the benefit of the chemotherapy also improves. So from both the trials, it has been confirmed that the PD-L1 expression in the form of either CPS or TPS is an important, and the survival is better. The first line trial of the immunotherapy is Keynote 048 trial, where the pembrolizumab is used either as a monotherapy over a period of 2 years or combined with the chemotherapy, that is extreme trial, and or only extreme, where cetuximab is combined with the chemotherapy. And in both the other arms, pembro is continued for completion of 2 years, and cetuximab is continued further till what the time. And you can see the majority of the patients had a metastatic disease. Recurrent disease were only 27% of the patients. Only 20% of the patient approximately had a TPS score of more than 50, and CPS score of more than 20, were almost 40% of the patient. This is an important, because based on this, the analysis is going to happen. So as there are two arms, one arm is comparing pembro monotherapy versus extreme chemotherapy, and you can see in this group that the median OS is 14.9 months versus 10.1 months, and there are definitely good number of survivals at the end of the 2 years. If you look at the OS, where the CPS score is more than 20, and if your CPS score is more than 1, the OS comes down. If you cut down the CPS score threshold to 1. What is happening to between 1 and 19, and that AACR, there is a data presented, and I'm showing you in the last slide over there what is that data also. That is also a positive data. And CPS score is more than 1, that is 12.3 months versus 10.3 months. And you can see the difference is becoming very shorter, but there is a p-value is significant. PFS is actually not very, p-value is not significant. As you know that the immunotherapy acts little slowly, chemotherapy acts faster. So there is a 6 months to 7 months gap, which is required for a crossover to happen. So these are the progression-free survival for the patient receiving the pembrolizumab versus the chemotherapy alone. Look at the response rates. Those patients who are having a CPS score of more than 20, the median duration of response is little longer as compared to the chemotherapy, only in the patients who have CPS score more than 20 in this arm of the pembrolizumab and this thing. The subgroup analysis, I won't go down too much in detail. When you compare the OS in the chemotherapy plus pembro versus chemotherapy alone, that is extreme. Even here, the median PF is 13 versus 10.7 months, which is highly significant, and hazard ratio is 0.77. So almost 30% of the patients are alive at the end of the 2 years. PFS again here is not significant, and it is 4.9 months versus 5.1 months, as because it takes 6 months time to have the difference to get in. The duration of response in the pembro plus chemo was 6.7 months versus 4.3 months. It is little more, but there have been little discrepancies in the duration of response into the clinical trial when they were presented. It works in both in never smokers or former smokers, whether P16 is positive or negative. And this is what the keynote trial subgroup analysis of CPS score 1 to 19. And this exploratory analysis of 1 to 19 suggested median improvement in OS, and the hazard ratio is 0.71 in both chemotherapy plus pembro versus chemotherapy alone, or monotherapy, where the hazard ratio is 0.86, that is pembro versus the extreme alone. So the ISMO has given this, ISMO guideline has recommended this as a score as a 4. That means it is a relevant clinically benefit seen in the palliative setting. They also looked at what happens to the patient who have failed and received the second line therapy. That is called as PFS2. And if the patients who have received PFS2, pembro as a monotherapy and the CPS score of more than 20, the hazard ratio was 0.64, while CPS score was more than 1, hazard ratio was 0.8. Even in the chemotherapy arm, also the second PFS2 or the PFS2 is comparatively better as compared to the patient receiving only chemotherapy. So what are my takeaways from this trial, from this data, is that pembrolizumab works. I think where I would like to use pembrolizumab alone, the patients who are elderly, frail, not fit for any chemotherapy, they are asymptomatic or low volume. In such patients, maybe I will go for pembrolizumab alone, but for all other patients, I would like to go ahead with the chemotherapy and pembrolizumab. And if you have a CPS score of 0, there is no role of any immunotherapy in such patients. CPS score of 1 to 19 population, pembro plus chemotherapy is superior, and more than 20, pembro plus chemotherapy is superior to such patients. I think this has all been covered in earlier, show that the addition of the pembrolizumab to chemotherapy improves significantly the overall survival. Thank you very much. So I tried to finish early so that, as a doctor he was saying, to have a discussion more on that. Thank you.
Dr. D'Cruz, are you there?
Yes, I am. I think great talks, Mehboob and Mudassir. With the organizers, can we have a few questions? Arnab, Dr. Pankaj, I think it'll be nice to...
Yeah, I'm sure, because we still are kind of, we are running five minutes before time. So I think we should...
Okay, so let me take the prerogative and ask the first question. Mehboob, Mudassir, I enjoyed both your presentations. As a clinician treating head and neck, I always have this debate here. We talk about when response is needed, go the extreme way because you get the best overall response. But to me, all patients who need palliation usually have big tumors. You sometimes get a recurrence. The patient is asymptomatic. Someone goes, orders a PET scan, and then they come running to me and say, should we take treatment? Now you have an asymptomatic patient, not much of disease. What is your philosophy if I send to either of you all to treat the patient?
So I will get the TPS score done, the PDL1. If the PDL1 is more than 20, the CPS score is more than 20, if the asymptomatic patient, I would like to go ahead with the single agent immunotherapy. But if there is no immediate requirement of reduction of the tumor bulk, that is asymptomatic. That is what I mean. And if somebody has got symptoms because of the disease per se, then chemo plus immunotherapy.
I think that's a perfect justification. But I'll tell you, Mehboob, I don't practice in South Bombay like you do, and many of my patients may not be able to afford the single agent. And there are a lot of people listening to us. So my philosophy would be exactly like yours. But if they're asymptomatic and I cannot afford the checkpoint inhibitors, I do consider metronomic. Comments from either of y'all.
So I agree.
Sir, sir, thank you.
Why
Thank
not
you for
we
the
go
question, sir.
there?
Yeah, Mudassar,
Thank
go
you for the
ahead.
question.
Mudassar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir, if a patient comes to me, I think I usually take 4 or 5. I ask 4 or 5 questions to myself first. So first question is, when the patient has had a recurrence or a metastasis, how much time has elapsed after the patient has received the first line or any treatment in the past? Even it may be in the locally advanced setting, or it may be in the as a form of concurrent chemotherapy administration. So if it is less than 6 months, then it has been shown that there is not much benefit from the cetuximab containing treatments. So and immunotherapy single agent or immunotherapy, for example, nivolumab from the Checkmate 141, I think. So that has shown that benefit even in those patients who have relapsed very early after the previous chemotherapy. Another important factor is the frailty of the patient, is the age of the patient, as well as the financial status of the patient. I think with the Dr. Vijay Patil, 2 trials which he has published in the last 7 years, I think they certainly put a metronomic therapy with a combination of methotrexate, weekly methotrexate, and celecoxib is as one of the options. They give a good survival, and they are like quite cheap, which actually most of our Indian patients actually are.
Yeah, I think interesting points you all make. And I just believe if we can have, I'm part of both Vijay's studies, and it started when I was there as well. I just believe we need a little more robust data to make the world believe. And I know there are ongoing trials, and soon that data will be out, because cost is something that is a concern not only in our part of the world, but the world over, even in the most advanced healthcare systems. Any other questions in the chat box? Arna, Dr. Pankaj Shah want to make
I would
any
like
comments?
to ask Basade, many times patient within 6 months, they come with a very aggressive disease. Initially, their characterization is T1 or T2N0, probably from the oral cavity. And within 6 months, they come with very aggressive disease. What should be our approach in such cases?
So that means that they are not responding to chemotherapy also. So if they have failed early, and if they have received radiation or concomitant chemoradiation, they will not also respond. So I have to add.
Those who have received only surgery,
Okay.
Yeah.
and they come with a very aggressive disease.
Yeah, sir. But then in those situations, we would like to look into the chemoradiation part, or surgically if it is operable. Our role will be little later.
Can I make a comment here? I see a lot of patients. 40% of work I do is redo work, sir. And what I would do is first look at the histopath report and look at who's operated. If it's been operated by an uninitiated oncologist, a lot of ENTs operate head and neck, a lot of general surgical oncologists whose specialty is GI, with no offense. And I feel margins were close, this, that, and the other, I'll still go very aggressively for resurgery followed by chemo-RT.
Yes.
So always lose that out. Only if it's gone to places where I cannot remove the disease, then I would bring Mehboob or Mudassar in. And I agree, if it's biologically aggressive, even they can do precious little in those cases. But we try for all our patients. I see Ramesh come on, and he's first I thought our Prime Minister has come onto the screen. Anyway, okay, please go ahead. Arnab, some comments from you.
Not really. I think we'll wait for the next 2 sessions, because I think we are now kind of on time. So maybe after the next 2 sessions, we'll have more questions. So thanks, Dr. Anil De Cruz. We are proud of you. You are the first Indian to be the UICC president, I believe. So
yeah.
Big congratulations to you from all the societies in India. And we are proud from ISO point of view as well.
Thank you.
I think what I'll do is introduce the next speaker. The topic is improving outcomes in head and neck cancer with a multidisciplinary approach. So for any cancer, we know that multidisciplinary approach is very important, and more so with advanced head and neck cancer or locally advanced head and neck cancer. And we have a speaker, none other than Dr. Ramesh Bilimaga. I also had the same difficulty recognizing him. It's probably a new normal look, and you look, even kind of more elegant. He is Ombudsman, Head Regulatory Affairs, and Senior Consultant Radiation Oncologist in Healthcare Global Enterprises Limited. So what do you, Professor Bilimaga? Thank you very much.
Thank you. My slides and voice is clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah. Thank you, DeCruz, and also the chairpersons, Dr. Pankaj Shah and Arnab Gupta. My topic is actually whatever you people have discussed. How do we bring all those things into a multidisciplinary approach? If you really see this title, it contains 4 important words. One is improving, second is outcome, third is head and neck carcinoma, and fourth one is multidisciplinary approach. Let us understand each one of them. So obviously, my talk will be completed by the time. The why head and neck cancer that has been chosen. We have a lung and we have a breast, and the head and neck is also, if you really see, the Globocan clearly shows it has more than 10% of the cancer that's involved and is the head and neck. So it's a major issue world over. And not only the world over, and when you see even Indian data, and which was published just about a year back, and from the data from the National Cancer Registry, that also clearly shows about a 13.4% is the head and neck share of the cancers that is involved in our country. So therefore, it is certainly an issue on which everybody has to talk about. That is the point one. But the second point is also relates to the poor and to the moderate outcome that we get. If you trace back almost to 30 years, and in 82 to 86, to almost 90 to 10 years, the 5-year survival has hardly improved by 2%. And thereafter, in another 10 years, and it was again by 10%. So this is the period and which has really got into action. So let us see why and how. The other point is also true. That is, the early recurrence and a second malignancy is very common in head and neck. About 50 to 60% of these patients develop a loco-regional recurrence and within 2 years. And about 20 to 30 of these patients have a distant metastasis. And even the second malignancy, is almost the lifetime risk is about 10 to 20%. So therefore, there is a definite need to talk about it more and more. And how do we define our outcome when we talk about it? It is not just the clinical outcome, and the FDA has given a very nice definition for that. It's a measure that describe how patient feels, function, and survive. So all these part are important, particularly the quality of life or the social outcome. They're all important part and which we should consider as a physician, not just the clinical outcome. There are many factors which are influences, which is very well known. There's a good monograph by Rosley and published back in 1975 itself. And there are 4 major factors: the tumor factor, the resource availability, and financial issues and psychological issues. Just in the previous talk we heard, and all these factors did play a major role in making the decision and for the patient's well-being. The next point, or the word that is important to understand, is what is a multidisciplinary approach. And it is where clinicians from a different specialty and collaborate and interact as a team in order to provide an effective, timely, and evidence-based management of those complex and heterogeneous tumor. And head and neck and fits into this category and very, very much. And is it very new and that we are really talking about? No. Really, back in 1960, Stanford University and professors Henry Kaplan and Rosenberg, and they propagated and pioneered this concept of a multidisciplinary clinic. And from there, and we took it off. it is not necessarily, it is this multidisciplinary clinic is important in terms of management in the medical field, but it's also in the social work. And this book is very interesting book to see, and the first volume came up in 1965. It says that is the first volume of them was professionals should make a unique contribution to the modern problems is by mutually influencing way. That means all these professionals and should come together to understand the disease or the problem that they have, that can really contribute. So finally, a realization really dawned in to all our medical fraternity, and they now know that the single modality is insufficient to cure cancer or to tackle cancer. And that led to the emergence of the multimodality, that is surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, and further advancement, and particularly tumor biology and genomics have played quite a lot of role, and that is resulted in a personalized medicine. And the further development is happening in the field of technology revolution, which we saw in the past 2 decades. You take it for surgery, either a TOS or robotic is now started playing a major role. Radiation, IGRT, tomotherapy, IMRT, and cyberknife, they're all being very, very technologically savvy, and we started using that. Chemotherapy and personalized medicine, and either immunotherapy or adaptive therapy is also a point that we are really talking about. That is not just sufficient. We know that many patients, even if you treat and by a standard of care, and can we predict them whether they will respond to our treatment or not? Now we are advancing into genomics and radiogenomics, and combining that, can we predict them early so that we can modify our treatment and onto that particular patient concern? That's the way, and we are really advancing in the science. And now, having said so, can we again ask why MDT? So we know that multidisciplinary opinion in a single platform can be given, and a direct interaction of all the specialists and patient will certainly be benefited, and a better compliance of the patient, because there are many people are now following the patient, and the academic and research, and it is the key and for any advance of the science, and is possible and with this approach. And medico-legally also in these complex cases in the present era, and it is very protective and good for the patient too, and to the profession. And where can we use this MDT? Apart from the routine management of the cases, there are other indications and where they are really, really useful, or in the loco-regionally advanced cases, borderline operable, recurrent cases, distant metastasis, and second malignancy. These are the areas it really requires a multidisciplinary approach to our problem that we face in our profession. And who are the people involved in this MDT? And we know the surgeon, and we have a radiation oncologist, and we have the medical oncologist, but that is not just sufficient today. We need more medical faculty involved in the care of these patients, like a psycho-oncologist, speech and swallow therapy, in particular head and neck, nutritionist, palliative care physician, dentist, and medicos. So this medico-social worker is a very important person who plays a role in assessing the patient and facilitating him how we can today mobilize the finances and for the patients, and through various schemes which is available today. Pathologists and radiologists, they play a vital role in decision making in our team. But very important part, don't forget, all these things should center around the patient. Then only it becomes a fruitful. Is there any evidence to show that multidisciplinary, the approach is helping? And this is in a very, good article. In this article, it says not only in the treatment, right in the diagnostic and in the treatment decision making itself, and it influences. And the changes, and there is a change in the decision of the malignant by 24% versus a 6, and in a malignant cases, and in a benign 6% of the times it has changed. And it is also seen a significant number, there's a 25.7% of the patients with a newly diagnosed head and neck have changed their treatment plan. That means almost one fourth of the patients, and that amounts to a great advantage to the patient, and if it requires a good treatment. Second one is, can we lower the risk of the death in these patients? And this article, which clearly says, this is actually by Lee, and that shows, and it is in a 5-year, disease-specific survival has improved after the MDT, and that is from 52% to 75%. So there is a survival benefit, and in these cases, and it is now known. And how do we are using the utility of the supportive services now in the cases? Even for that also there's a good trial, and which is which has been done, and it's a small number, but yet it's a very useful trial, and that shows when you give appropriate the supportive services, the 5-year disease-free survival has increased from 63 to 81%. So therefore, definitely there's an evidence the multidisciplinary clinic or the board is really helping. So the people went on and analyzing these things, retrospectively and prospectively. They did 2 systematic reviews, and there are 2 retrospective reviews, and it showed the diagnostic and modification occurred in 4 to 45% of the cases, and quite a lot of the dental evaluation, PET staging, adjuvant RT, those things have changed in a significant number of patients. And new staging evolution was 49% of the patients, and MDT was certainly made a difference in the treatment decision. So this is what the both retrospective and prospective review has told us. Then when do we do these study? Should it be in a platform in one go, so that all the patients only visit only one time, or should it be in a multiple appointment with the various doctors? But this it has shown, if it is in one go at one clinic, and it is very easy for the patient, and advantages time delay and comprehensive care and patient can get. So even in the multidisciplinary approach, and there's a comprehensive approach, and one can really give to these patients. And this this paper is very interestingly dissected by Dr. Tejpal Gupta from our TMH, and it says what are the hidden pitfalls that when we do MDT. It says lack of a response from the professionals. And I know this is done about 13 years back, and today things have really changed. And the professionals, if they don't come together to contribute, then it becomes difficult. Then many times autocritic behavior of any consultant, this is the only way we should go, then the decision making becomes a difficulty. Then should we go by the majority of the vote or uniformity? The best way to go is to have a consensus of opinion and given to the patient, and that's the right way to go. And this also happens in the dilution the responsibility. Earlier, the only one doctor used to look at it. At that time, all responsibility used to lie on his shoulder. But because of this, more the consultants are shared, and this responsibility is also diluted. But it has a both good and bad issue in that. The financial consideration is also heavy, because more number of people are now seeing, and there the patient has to shell out more. These are the few pitfalls on which multidisciplinary clinic and will have. What happens if we don't have the MDT, and the patient takes off time, and with a multiple appointment, he goes for second opinion, third opinion with a different people, and time lapses are so crucial in this cancer patients. Different opinions from the different the doctors, and many times they go for the Google doctor, and patient gets confused. And this discussion with a multidisciplinary specialist and gives the patient a confidence, and in a single platform about his making up the mind for the treatment plan offered by the multidisciplinary clinic. So multiple specialty networking and collaborative intelligence always better, and which is proved not only in the medical field, in any field, networking is always a better the outcome it yields. Now that the MDT has been done, Is it that every decision of the MDT is really followed? Even for that, there's a good analysis was done, and it showed that almost out of 273 patients analyzed, 41 patients they could not comply and with the MDT decision. The reason was the 18% of the 18 patients had a morbid health issue, and 14 had a related related to patient choice, and 8 patients decision changed, and because the clinical information in the beginning was not available. So therefore, there can be a change so long as it's to the betterment of the patient. It's always welcome to do that. And this is how our in our HCG, and we do the the MDT, and we have all the different specialists, and they come together, and the key every the Thursday afternoon case is presented and discussed, and the patient is finally called, and in front of the patient the consensus opinion is given to them and to make a choice, and patient can now discuss in the open platform, and whatever the not only patient, even the patient attendant are also called to discuss about the case of the management that is required and for the patient. So to conclude, it has to be MDT has to be a patient centric. It has to be a holistic approach and improve and clinical. It certainly improves the clinical result that we have seen it in the evidence-based medicine, and it paves way for the research because we can get a good data collection, and also improves the compliance of the patient. And next horizon has to be how do we prevent and predict the results of our treatment, and also it gives a direction. In all the respects, certainly there's a good hope that if we do the MDT, and patient is the beneficiary in the overall game. Thank you, and I will stop sharing. If there's any questions, I'm willing to take.
Thank you, Professor Velimaga. That was a wonderful discussion on a very pertinent topic in today's world. We knew the Western system, which used to follow all these protocols, but only bad thing that I used to miss was that the patients were not actually in the room during the discussion or at the end of the discussion, which you probably practice to bring the patient and the attendant in so that you can actually talk about many other things when you actually see the patient. They might have a lot of financial issues. The patient's performance status may not be the right kind of profile where you want to deliver all the treatments. So it's very important that you actually call the patient at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
That's very important thing that you do. And in our hospital, what we do probably is not the best thing, that we don't actually have the full team like you have. But what we also do is, obviously, we get the social worker there and we talk about the social support so that we know, they are actually able to afford the full treatment that you actually deliver to, that you have proposed to them. Any questions? Sorry, any question, Dr. Pankaj Shah?
Yes, one point which is missing in almost everywhere in the country is the involvement of the psycho-oncologist, because head and neck cancer, particularly surgery, is associated with lots of mutation of the head, of the face. And many times they don't want to accept those things post-operative. So I don't know whether your group is having a psycho-oncologist with you or not, but many times, at least once in a month, people come that I was wrongly operated by the people. They have taken lots of tissue which was not necessary. So psycho-oncologist is one. And from the very beginning, the palliative care specialist must be in the picture.
Absolutely.
Because surgery or radiation therapy or the chemotherapy, at the end, patient have to land with palliative care. And at that time, they either catch hold of a good surgeon if he is talking nicely with the patient, or a medical oncologist, or a radiation oncologist. And he don't get proper palliative care or support care. So these are the few points which I have observed. And Dr. Gupta, anything to add now?
I would add something.
The panel discussion.
Yeah, I would just quickly, before we go to the panel, I would endorse 100% Dr. Pankaj Shah's observations. And there's enough robust data to show us that getting a palliative care specialist early into treatment impacts on outcomes, everything. I mean, not only survival, even survival, but other aspects of onco care. So I'll just make an appeal. Many of us work in institutions that may not have palliative care, but it's something we need to look forward to. You have locally advanced cancers where about 50% are going to recur at the initiation of treatment. treatment, get your palliative care specialist involved. I think it's evolving. Sir, you've made a great point. I totally endorse that.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
agree with you, Anil. In fact, that is the reason why. And today, whoever says that the cancer I have tackled, it is not just the tackling of the cancer, but how do we give back their life, the functionally as well as societally? How do they really react? And to that, you need all these the medical specialists to input into that. That adds a life to their years that is left. Pankaj sir, luckily in our center we do have a psycho-oncologist, sir, and I really recommend all our the specialists, please promote that. This is a real requirement of the patients to go through them, and they will be immensely benefited. Don't forget about our medico-social workers who will be a liaison, who will help us in today's scenario. There are various umpteen ways to raise money for the patient care, and they will help. And otherwise, they will drop out because of financial issue. That should not really happen.
You might have prescribed immunotherapy, all this, and the
Yes.
wonderful chemotherapies and all. But the patient, when you look at the patient, he's probably a villager who has to sell his house to afford
Correct. You are right.
That's very important. So all very important points. I think we'll have to move on. Dr. Shah, with your permission, can I introduce the next speaker, because he's a very close
Sure.
Yeah. So
Please.
we have Dr. Rajendra Toprani, who is actually the moderator for the panel discussion on locally advanced oral cancer. He is the president-elect of Indian Association of Surgical Oncology. So he's going to take over from me in a few months' time. He is also the senior consultant, obviously, and head and neck surgeon at HCG Cancer Center, of which he is the director as well. And he is the director of Asta Cancer Center as well. So thank you, Dr. Toprani. And I would like to thank the organizers before, I don't get a chance, especially, again, very close friends, Dr. Dhaireshul Sawan and Dr. Sanjeev Mishra, the Honorary Secretary and the President of this society, for having me here. Thank you, Dr. Toprani. You can introduce
I join with Dr. Gupta. Here's a comment.
So at the outset, let me thank the organizers, ISO President and the Secretary, Dr. Sanjeev Mishra, Dr. Sawan, and Dr. Suman Gupta, the local organizing secretary, for having invited me to moderate this panel. My respect to Dr. Pankaj Bhai. I'm seeing you after so many months now, and regards to Arnab and Dick Cruz and all. We had one medical oncologist on the panel who has not joined. So I would definitely request any other medical oncologist, and definitely Pankaj Bhai, to stay on the discussion, because we might need your inputs during discussion. So let me just briefly introduce the panelist. Dr. Shravan Shetty is a surgical oncologist. Shivam from Faridabad is a surgical oncologist. And of course, Dr. Devendra from TMH. And Dr. Kinjal Jani from HCG Ahmedabad is a radiation oncologist. Dr. Suman Kumar is a radiodiagnostic physician, the radiologist, head and neck specialist from TMH. And I think Dr. Sandeep Jasuja is a medical oncologist. He has not joined, but it's okay. If he's joined later, we can definitely include him. So we had a beautiful session before this about Dr. Bilimaga talking about the multidisciplinary, and it is not out of place to discuss that it is so important for the locally advanced oral cancer that you need to have an MDT in your hospital. And let me take you back to the 6th edition of the TNM classification, where they divided T4 into A and B, the moderately advanced and the very advanced disease. And even in the 8th edition in 2018, the same classification said that the T4B is still very advanced local disease. The only thing they did was the depth of invasion was involved. My question to the panel is, particularly the surgeons, do you agree with this kind of staging system where they have a stage T4B as very advanced local disease without considering so many other factors, or do you think that they could have done a better job? Devendra?
Yeah, Dr. Toprani. So we all know that staging system is not very accurate. You need to have a balance between having a simple staging system which can be applied across the world. If you try to make it more complex, then it cannot be applied to various parts of the world. And that is why you see these fallacies in TNM staging, not only in oral, but elsewhere as well. So yeah, they have changed it from inoperable to locally advanced because of some data coming up that the people that were clubbed in T4B, the patients that were clubbed in T4B, did not have the same outcome. And that is why they said they left it to us, said that it's very advanced disease. They didn't say it's inoperable disease. So that is the one change that has happened over the years.
Right. And I'm sure Dr. Anil is still on this discussion group. And this was a good review article written by his group. And we almost know that T3 onwards is all considered to be locally advanced oral cancer. But there is hardly any controversy for T3 and T4A lesions, where surgery followed by radiation is a standard of treatment. The whole controversy, the whole discussion is all about this T4B lesion. And this is because they have mentioned that very local advanced disease is because even if the tumor invades the masticator space, it becomes a locally advanced. So let us understand from our radiologists on the panel. Dr. Suman Kumar, what do you think this masticator space? Can you describe for the benefit of all attendees, what is this masticator space that we are all discussing?
Yes, sir. The masticator space includes the masseter muscle, medial pterygoid, and lateral pterygoid. But the infratemporal fossa is includes only the masticator space, and the the masseter is not included in the infratemporal fossa. Now the surgeons are concerned with the infratemporal fossa rather than the masseter muscle. And if the disease is reaching above the sigmoid notch, and medial to the ramus of the mandible, then that would be a very locally advanced disease, which will not be resected. So the involvement of masticator space with only involvement of masseter muscle and medial pterygoid muscle is still considered locally advanced with and still can be resected.
Yeah. So when the surgeons they talk about a case, we talk about the lesion having invaded the ITF, the infratemporal fossa, and the discussion is all about the radiologist being talking about is the masticator space. So we need to understand the fine difference between the masticator space and the ITF. So this T4B, now it could be because of the anatomic proximity also. So any posterior buccal mucosa cancer can very easily be called T4B because of involvement of the surrounding structures. And there is a complex anatomy to understand for the surgeons. There is a definite high clinical burden in India about this T4B buccal cancers. There is no uniform strategy and it differs from center to center. And the only thing is the NCCN considered it to be a very advanced local disease. And it termed it as almost unresectable or inoperable. And the main concern was the margin, of course. So even in the NCCN guidelines, the T4B, the guideline included only concurrent chemo-RT or induction chemotherapy followed by concurrent CT-RT. So there was no guideline where it included surgery as the upfront treatment modality in T4B. So my question to the surgeons, Shravan and Shivam, what do you think? How do you define resectability?
When you talk about T4B cancers, I would always say that if it's a low ITF involvement also, then we can think about surgery. Resectability is good margins. So anything which is high ITF involvement is two things which we look at. One is the pterygomaxillary fissure and the inferior orbital fissure. If any disease is going into that area or somewhere close to that area, we will never be able to get an R0 resection in that particular scenario. That is one thing.
Shivam, what is your viewpoint about resectability in such T4B buccal cancers?
The same. We need to have an R0 resection, a minimum of 5 millimeter, though compromised. We need to have at least that much of margin with a good functional outcome, reconstructional outcome post-surgery. So all these things have to be taken into consideration before taking a decision of surgery first.
Right. So the NCCN has defined unresectability also, and you can all go through that document. And unresectability and inoperability are two different things. But usually we talk about the same thing always. And let us go to the first case now. This is one patient, 42 years of age, a male patient who is a tobacco chewer, and he presented with an ulcer of the left buccal mucosa for last 3 months. No comorbidities, with a recent history of trismus, and uh, incisor distance was only 0.5 centimeter, with an also infiltrated lesion in the left buccal mucosa from the ankle of mouth up to RMT, with puckering of the overlying skin. So this is a clinical photograph of the patient. And what do you think? What will be the next action you will do, Shivam and Shravan?
I would always prefer to have a good CT scan of the head and neck area and a CT of the thorax, because a CT scan would be something which would give me good information about the underlying bone involvement, little bit of soft tissue involvement, including the ITF involvement, and a CT thorax basically to see for any lung mets. Basically.
So you will start with a CT scan of the neck
and a CT scan head neck and a CT scan thorax, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Any difference of opinion from the other two surgeons?
No, sir, same. PET CT is not very helpful in deciding this because we need to see the local area and of course the chest, thorax.
Okay, so this was clinically N0. And so I think we can get an opinion from Suman Kumar. In which situation is CT scan more helpful, and in which situation an MRI would be preferable by should be the preferred modality of imaging for the head and neck?
So for extent of vertical bone erosion, the CT scan would be helpful. And if you are suspecting a perineal spread, if there is a suspicion of involvement of pre-vertebral fascia and the skull base, MRI would be more helpful.
So majority of the surgeons would prefer to go with CT scan to begin with. Devendra, any opinion on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with whatever has been said. So first investigation is CT, neck and thorax to see for, because the most common site of metastasis, if any, are the lung. And the MRI will be added, as Suman said, when you are suspecting perineural invasion. And second thing, when there's gross marrow involvement, sometimes to see the extent of marrow involvement, we may add an MRI over and above a CT scan.
Would anybody do a PET CT on this patient upfront?
If there is extensive nodal metastasis, then PET CT would be helpful. Otherwise, CT scan thorax, neck and thorax would be helpful.
There is some data on doing an upfront PET CT in staging for locally advanced head and neck cancer, and it upstages the disease in few patients. So I think we may not be wrong if we do a PET CT upfront in these patients. What do you say?
May I go? Well, it's not wrong, but as I said, the majority of the metastases are the lung. And as Suman correctly said, when you have a doubt that because of the nodal disease or lower level neck nodes, that you may have metastasis elsewhere, if there are any other symptoms, then
so
you may add a PET CT.
CT thorax along with CT neck is equally good. So
Yeah.
that is a good message for all the youngsters who are listening. That every time you don't need to do an upfront PET CT, a CT thorax combined with a CT neck is a good enough modality. And this was a PET CT. This patient underwent a PET CT anyway. So this was a PET CT image that we have got. And this was the report of this patient. This lesion was a bulky lesion, infiltrating the buccal fat and the subcutaneous fat up to the skin, with a gross erosion of the mandible in involvement of the canal. Both the sulci were involved, of course, and it involved the masseter, medial pterygoid, and the temporalis muscle. There were FDG heterogeneous nodes at 1B and 2. So, what is Dr. Suman? Would you report? Do you think this report is good enough, or would you add anything for the clinicians to know?
Sir, I would like to see the bone window for the bone erosion. And if they have mentioned that there is no erosion, I think they would have looked at the CT scan of the bone window. And then.
Okay. So any of the surgeons on the panel would you need more information on this, apart from what has been reported, Devendra?
Yeah, maybe in this case, I would like to add an MRI. I would like to see the nerve up to the skull base, because
Great.
there's widening of that foramina and there's a perineal, because there's a marrow involvement here. And if it has gone along the nerve right up to the skull base or the foramens, then maybe I will not operate this patient.
Correct. So
otherwise, if I don't have that involvement, then maybe I will consider.
yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the MRI images, but I'm sure that this patient had undergone an MRI, and the MRI did not show any perineal invasion. So in that situation, for all the surgeons on this panel, what do you think that this is what stage of disease is this, and is it resectable, borderline resectable, or unresectable? I'll start with Shravan, Shivam, and then Devendra.
Probably I would think of giving
What stage? How would you stage this patient? This is a T4B and N2.
T4B N2. So probably I would want to give him chemotherapy first and then take him up for surgery after that, depending upon the response for chemotherapy.
So just a quick answer. So you think that this is unresectable or a borderline resectable?
Borderline resectable. This is borderline resectable.
Okay. What about Shivam?
Sir, I don't think it's resectable. It's T4B and 2. We should go ahead with neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by reassessment. If it's operable, then operate.
Devendra?
Yeah, so no, I need to look at the PET CT more carefully. You know, this whole thing of operability and getting a margin is when disease is more lateral in the masseter, then you are more keen on operating the patient. As it goes more medial and superior, it's not only superior, inferior, it's also medial and lateral. As it goes more medial, it goes near the pterygoid plates and pterygomaxillary fissure. And that is the place where you will not get the margin, as the other surgeon said. So evaluate carefully if it is going very high or going very medially. Then maybe there's a chance that this you may not get a negative margin. The whole game is to get a negative margin. If you're quite sure of getting a negative margin, the other thing that factor is important in this is there's bone erosion. And if you look at the NACT data, if you look at the match pair analysis that we had published, the people with the bone erosion do the worst.
I'm coming to that, Devendra, but you have brought some good points in discussion. Depending on disease in which cotton the disease is, your resectability margin is important, and you'll decide whether to upfront operate this patient. But having said that, in this patient, would you operate or?
I think it's going quite high up. Plus, there's N2 disease, so this is a very high tumor burden. Maybe I also give NACT, decide whether this patient is favorable, and then take him off for surgery.
Yeah. So there are no takers on this panel who would upfront operate this patient. Would you like to do a compartment resection, a full radical infratemporal fossa clearance to achieve negative margins? Anybody on that thought? Shravan or Shivam?
Not upfront, sir. Post NACT will reassess.
Okay. So which patients would you do a compartment excision, or you don't believe in compartment excision?
I do believe in compartment excision. The only thing is, if it's a low ITF involvement, if there was no nodes much, then I would have probably thought of getting it. No, because there's, like Dr. Devendra said, not much of a medial disease, more or less of more of a lateral disease. Probably with the skin excision, probably a compartment dissection with a low ITF involvement. I would have thought of that, but not because of this N2 disease.
So you are saying a low ITF involvement. You mean a low supranotch involvement? That's what you mean, or you mean infranotch involvement?
Infranotch. If the infranotch, I would have still been able to get.
But then you would do a compartment excision for that patient.
So probably what happens if you get a complete resection, I would have attempted at least. But like I said, that's only if it was not very high ITF involvement.
Yeah, but you do a compartment excision for all low infranotch disease.
Yeah, I prefer to do that way because what happens, at least you have by margins.
What do you do, Shivam, in your practice?
Sir, if it's only infranotch, then
you do a traditional surgery with a 1 centimeter soft tissue margin all around, or do you do a compartment excision?
Compartment excision, sir.
Compartment. Devendra?
Yeah, so this compartment first came in tongue, as we all know, and it was extrapolated to buccal mucosas. Now, this I don't really understand this compartment because you have to go where you have to go. You have to get a negative margin, and more importantly, this compartment is when it's going slightly into the infratemporal. The advocate going to the skull base and taking out all the pterygoid muscles to decrease the bleeding and making it simpler. But you have to attempt finally at a 1 centimeter margin, and you have to go where you need to go. So if it needs to be compartmented, so be it, as long as you can get a centimeter margin all around the tumor.
Yeah. So this there was a very good paper presentation by Liao, and what they discussed was that the masticator space can be divided further into a supranotch and an infranotch disease, and this is what the whole discussion was all about. That the T4B oral cavity cancer below the mandibular notch is resectable with a favorable outcome, and they showed a definite higher 5-year local regional control and survivors also with infranotch disease rather than with the supranotch T4B. But I don't know, I'm not sure what kind of surgery they did. They did not do in the paper what they published, they did not do compartment excision, right?
Yeah, they haven't mentioned the details of the surgeries as far as I remember.
Right.
And it's only a database of 45 patients, not really anything great. And we know this. We know this that, more inferior and more lateral the tumor, we are going to have better outcomes, because just by involving the masseter or the lower part of the pterygoid doesn't make it. And that is the problem with TNM. You have such a large gamut of large range of tumors included in T4B, or say stage 3-4. You have T1N1 to T4N3 all coming into stage 3-4. So that's the problem with TNM.
So this particular case that we are discussing is actually a supranotch lesion, and the reason why supranotch lesions are more aggressive than infranotch is because usually they have got 3 or more components involved, and you get less margins from the skull base when you carry out your resection. You get a very commonly the perineural invasion, and as you said, Devendra, the posterior masticator space involvement is more common, and it's a bulkier disease. Size is more than 4 centimeter, and they obviously present sometimes with a higher nodal metastatic burden. So supranotch diseases are difficult to treat, difficult to get margins, and this is what Nirav and his group they suggested that a radical surgical excision remains the mainstay of the curative intent. But there was no robust data based on that. Any comments on this paper, Devendra, Shivam, or Shravan?
Yeah. So, Dr. Toprani, if you see even this paper and Pillai's paper subsequently, is that when they classified into class 1, which is lower, class 2 and class 3, even class 2, class 3, they club together, and the margin positivity rate is higher than class 1. So class 2, class 3 was around 11-12% versus 2% in class 1. So clearly the message is that the higher the tumor, if your ability, it's a value judgment. If your ability to get the negative margin is there, operate. If you're thinking that there is a possibility that you'll get a positive margin, maybe better to downstage the tumor. And that's the message that we should give.
So it is the understanding of your extent of the evaluation of the extent of the disease, and whether you will be able to get negative margins or not. That is the most important thing in the decision making. So these are very good points brought out by the surgeons on the panel, and the trainees must understand that all patients cannot be treated in the same way. So this was about the infranotch disease, and they said that the T4B lesions that were infranotch and were resected behaved as well as the T4A. Now, as all of you have said about neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you will all most probably treat these patients with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Is it because of the skin involvement, or is it because of the supranotch involvement of the temporalis? Shravan, Shivam?
So it could be basically because of the supranotch involvement of the primary, and also because of the bulky nodal disease. Anything which is end should give them probably chemotherapy, NACT, and then reassess them.
Shivam?
Same, sir. We need to see for both. We need to see for the negative margin to achieve, to see for a good cover, to see for whether it's a bulky nodal disease. So all depends. It's not a single parameter which we can rely on.
Okay.
Or our decision would be depending on.
So any medical oncologists on this panel? Pankaj, you are still there? Any medical oncologist still there on the panel? I don't think so. We got any response. So maybe any of you, or Kinjal, you are there, right?
Yes, sir.
So maybe you can pitch in place of a medical oncologist. So what do you think should be the practice? 2 drugs, 3 drugs, neoadjuvant chemotherapy, 2 cycles, 3 cycles? How does it help? Does it decrease the overall survival, local regional control? and decrease the distal metastasis, what would be your intention?
So, the first intention of this kind of patients is to downstage the tumor and routinely practice the 3-drug combination, which is the TPF, either a docetaxel or a paclitaxel with 5-FU and cisplatin. In a selected group of patients, where the cardiac is compromised, maybe, we can go for a 2-drug combination where it is a carboplatin and paclitaxel, or you may add a monoclonal antibodies in such patients where cardiac is compromised and you cannot go for 5-FU or cisplatin.
And how many cycles? How many cycles?
2 to 3 cycles. Usually we go for 3 cycles. It's an institutional policy, but we evaluate after every cycle. Clinically, evaluation is important. So on a routine, it is 3 cycles. But if the patient has an excellent response after 2, you might rechange your decision.
So what is your practice at TMH, Devendra, and then Shivam and Shravan also in your place?
Yeah, so exactly what Kinjal said. We'll give 2 cycles of 3-drug regime, assess. If it has become operable, we will operate it. If not, give the 3rd cycle. See that
any difference?
Yeah.
No, sir. We also follow
Shivan or Shravan, any difference in your practice?
No, sir. We follow the same.
Not really, not.
We follow the same thing. We reassess after 2 cycles. If they've got good response, then we take them up for surgery actually after that.
So again, a question for the surgeons. What margins will you take after neoadjuvant chemotherapy? You will take the pre-chemotherapy extent of the lesion as having adequate margins, or you will consider the post-neoadjuvant chemotherapy response of the tumor and then consider for excision?
We usually take the post-chemotherapy margins actually and post-chemotherapy.
Shivam?
Post-chemotherapy, sir. Otherwise, the whole purpose of NACT is defaulted.
Yeah.
Partly I said, partly no. There is almost impossible to know what the pre-chemotherapy margins were unless you go by the CT scan, which can be fallacious, because after the tumor has responded in this 3-dimensional area, you'll really never know that what are the pre-chemotherapy. So you need to go as wide as possible, a little more wider. Having said that, for the mandible preservation, we did operate in the post-chemotherapy margins, and we did see a increased local recurrence. So really, this question is not answered. But for advanced tumors, it may be better to look at the CT pre-chemo and try and go as wide in the post-chemo, go as wide as a little more wider than you would have normally gone.
Right. So for the young surgeons on this group, what would you advise? How do you decide?
Yeah, so you go, as I said, you go wider. You have a good response. You'll go, if you're going, normally if you had gone a centimeter, you'd go 1.5 to 2 centimeters, a little more wider in the post-chemotherapy for locally advanced disease. For operable disease, as I said earlier, we go by the post-chemotherapy. We went by the post-chemotherapy margin and didn't see any local recurrences.
Right. So neoadjuvant chemotherapy does help in skin involvement when there's a lot of edema and even in oral tongue patients. And this was a paper from TMS also. And they did treat all the patients after surgery with subsequently with CTRT, and we'll come to that. Again, a paper from TMH where all the supranorch diseases were treated with neoadjuvant chemotherapy with good response, followed up by surgery and chemoradiation. So, would you treat skin margins differently? Would you take? How do you consider the skin margins? As you said, you'll go wide.
Yeah, as wide as possible. Yes.
It depends on what reconstruction also you are going to do. That also you should be taking into consideration.
As Shivam said correctly, functional reconstruction has to be possible.
So the next question is, how do you treat this Kinjal in the post-operative period with radiation, chemotherapy, combination? All patients,
so
how do you select patients?
Yeah, so these patients are usually taken up for adjuvant CTRT, chemoradiation. And again,
all
this
patients,
is...
all patients.
Sorry? Yeah, all patients. Yeah, all patients.
Those who receive neoadjuvant chemotherapy.
Neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Yeah, exactly. And it all depends on the high risk factors. Like if the nodes are there, then definitely. But even if there is a single node and there is no perinodal spread, still these patients would be taken up for CTRT. And there is an institutional policy also. Like at few places they go for all chemoradiation. Though I am not too much in favor of that, because sometimes adding the adjuvant chemoradiation for excellently responded patients is adding too much morbidity, because whenever we are giving radiation after NSCT surgery, the reactions are comparatively more. So I am a bit skeptical.
Any difference of opinion by the surgeons? How would you treat your patients post-operatively? Would you treat according to the histopatho report, or all patients who have received neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you would treat with radiation with chemotherapy.
So we started off giving all patients CTRT because we thought we had compromised margins, or the hypothesis was that, you know, because of the new margins, you never know whether three-dimensionally you've cleared the margins and considering positive margins. But now we look at the pre-op CT scan and pre-op imaging and clinically, and if the patient has any criteria for CTRT in the post-operative setting, irrespective of the response we'll give. So there's extranodal spread pre-operatively, we would give CTRT. So the thinking is slightly changing. We don't have the right answer yet. But we are slightly changing, as Kinjal said very correctly, you know, adding post-op CTRT for a patient who responded very well is extremely toxic. So the thinking is changing slightly. We would go by the pre-operative, we'll go by the response, and then we'll go by the post-operative histopathology.
Kinjal, what about those patients who have achieved a complete pathological response? Would you radiate these patients, or would you give concurrent chemoradiation?
So I would
you observe these patients?
No. My opinion would be to go for only radiotherapy, only adjuvant radiotherapy, not chemotherapy. But, you know, as again, you know, rightly mentioned by Dr. Devendra, you know, we have to change our mindset because we have to see the previous things and all, because it becomes too toxic, you know, if you are adding CTRT. So if a patient has excellent response, and my medical oncologist colleague, where I discuss in an MDT, my medical oncologist colleague always says that patient has responded well to neoadjuvant chemo, so we should add adjuvant CTRT, and I am a bit skeptical of that.
So any difference of opinion about patients achieving complete pathological response in any of your practice? All of you will treat with radiation? How does it go at TMH?
Sorry, yeah, we would treat with radiation. For complete response, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if there's a complete response and there's no bone invasion preoperatively, if there's bone invasion preoperatively, we'll still remove that nidus and then give RT. If there's no bone invasion, then we would be more compelled to treat with...
No, complete pathological response.
Oh, complete pathological. Yeah, I would still give RT if it demanded RT preoperatively.
Okay. So do I have time, 2 more minutes to complete the second case? I just want to bring out a good point.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So this is another case, tongue cancer, 45-year-old male with ulcer on the right margin of the tongue, involving the floor of the mouth, clinically up to the midline, and the tongue movements were restricted, no palpable nodes, and this was MRI available. Obviously, MRI would have been the choice of imaging in this patient, and he also underwent PET CT somewhere else. So this was the PET CT report, and it reaches up to the midline without crossing it, and inferiorly it reaches, infiltrates the floor of the mouth, involving the genioglossus, hyoglossus, and the geniohyoid. It's a bulky disease, and it reaches just up to the hyoid bone. So a quick question round of answer from all the panelists on the Shravan, Shivam, and Devendra. How will you treat this patient? No distant metastasis. Surgery or chemotherapy followed by surgery or CTRT? Kinjal, you can also pitch in later.
So this is a bulky disease which is just short of hyoid bone. Technically, we should go with neoadjuvant chemoradiation followed by surgery. Though if we go for compartment resection, we may achieve a negative margin, but since it is very much close to the hyoid, it is better that we proceed with neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by surgery.
Shravan?
Probably neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by reassessment and then for surgery. The only thing is that hyoid is always about 2 millimeter that we mentioned on the scans. So our margins, I don't know afterwards, in case of tongue, compared to other oral cancers, our margins have to be a little more wider in tongue basically.
Devendra?
Yeah, I agree. 3 areas where we give chemo is one close to hyoid, one is edema, suprazygoma, and third is infratemporal fossa. So this qualifies for one of the criteria for borderline operable. If you think you're not going to get a margin on the hyoid, maybe you want to downsize the tumor and then operate.
So how much margin would you would be enough for you at the hyoid? 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter is enough?
5 millimeter to
5 millimeter. So
yeah.
This is, so anything above 5 millimeter you would operate upfront?
Yes, I would, because you know, tongue sometimes if it doesn't respond, then you're landing up with.
Kinjal, would you want to treat this patient with concurrent chemoradiation?
No. I would also prefer neoadjuvant chemotherapy for this.
Follow it up with surgery.
Follow it up with surgery, yes.
Great. I always loved you, Kinjal, that you don't agree to treat this patient with non-surgical treatment. And I'm happy to see that, a good message is being sent that such patients. Do you consider the functional impairment when you say that you will not treat with chemoradiation? You are not worried about that?
Yeah, so
yes, we do look at the functional impact on.
But you still go with surgery,
Post chemo,
neoadjuvant
yes.
chemotherapy followed by surgery.
Yes, I would do that.
Okay, and the last case, this kind of patients, how do you treat in your practice? This is obviously an unresectable patient. Just a quick answer from all of you. Palliation, curative intent, chemoradiation upfront, neoadjuvant.
NACT, if it's more lateral the
Neoadjuvant
disease, not
chemotherapy.
going posterior. NACT, see if response, surgery, if no response or progressive disease, CTRT.
Okay, but not upfront CTRT.
no.
I'll have to look
Upfront
at the CT scan
CTRT.
and see where else it is going. Yeah, NACT
It is
first.
surgery, radiation first would be disastrous because it's very close to the skin. It may burst out, cause fistula. It's better to go ahead with chemotherapy.
Devendra, let me just cut the story short and ask which patients will you consider totally unresectable from day one and don't start neoadjuvant chemotherapy and start upfront chemoradiation from day one?
Very high infratemporal fossa involvement, disease going back into the prevertebral fascia, a nodal disease that is stuck to the carotids. These patients, I would straight away upfront go with CTRT and not consider them for anything.
And grossly
Sorry for
involving
the
the skull.
interruption, sir.
Skull
Can you
base,
please
yes.
conclude as we are running short of time?
Sure. And the last slide. So what do you do in this kind of patients? Anybody would think of curative intent treatment or palliative?
Palliative.
Kinjal?
Yes, it looks like a palliative care only.
Yeah, so we do see such kind of patients. So when you say palliative, would it be single agent chemotherapy or
metronomic chemotherapy?
Metronomic
Metronomic.
or CTRT or only radiation?
No, metronomic chemotherapy.
Shravan, Shivam, Devendra, how would you treat at your center such patients?
Not RT for sure. It will worsen the necrosis. This will go for chemotherapy, either metronomic, mostly metronomic. Yeah.
Metronomic mostly.
Great. So I think we have seen different types of locally advanced head and neck cancer patients, and even though there is no level 1 evidence to how to treat this, at least we have got an idea of such after today's panel discussion. How do you treat these patients in your practice? And these are probably some take-home messages. And I would really urge that all of us should aim to conduct some prospective randomized trials for such T4B, supranotch, or borderline resectable disease, comparing neoadjuvant followed by surgery and versus upfront compartment surgery also. So, this kind of robust data is required to end this indecisiveness, and we must all get some data from India now. It is hard time that we give it from India. So I thank all my panelists for an active participation. Devendra, Shivam, Shravan, and Kinjal. Thanks for your participation and taking time out. Particularly Devendra, you are not well, still you are logged in. I really appreciate your presence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Toprani and all the panelists. We had wonderful discussion. We are running short of time, and maybe one or two quick questions, Dr. Shah or anybody else. And then we have to wrap up.
Are there any questions?
Since everybody is satisfied with all the discussions that you had, so I would like to thank the organizers once again, and the moderators and the panelists and all the faculties for the wonderful session that we had during my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me take this opportunity to thank everybody else, including Anil, to join in to this session. Thank you so much.
What I said, you have very, very vividly shown how our multidisciplinary clinic makes a difference in the patient care in all the cases that you have shown. It's a good example.
Yes.
Thank you so much.